This is the third blocks, that is the nationalisms. Here I am talking about the detailed lectures on the nationalisms. That is, when we're talking about the nationalisms, is a political ideology and social movements that emphasize the interest, cultures, and identity of a nations or a groups of peoples who share common elements such as language, history, religions, and geographical locations. Nationalisms often involves that belief that a nation should govern itself free from outside controls or influences, and that the loyalty and allegiance of individuals should primarily be directed towards their nations. Nationalisms has played a significant role in shaping modern political history, influences both the creations of a state and political conflicts around the world. Core elements of the nationalisms. A nation in the nationalist view is a more than just a political entity or a state. It is a community of peoples who share a common identity based on cultural, historical, ethnic, or linguistic characteristics. Nationalists believe that these groups should have a sovereignty over its own affairs. Next is that is talking about the self-determinations. One of the core principles of nationalism is the right of a people to self-determinations, the idea that nations have the right to govern themselves without external interference. This principle is central to the nationalist movements that seeks independence or autonomy, cultural unity. Nationalisms often emphasize that importance of a shared cultural and common history in creating a sense of belonging. This can include a common language, religions, customs, traditions, and value that binds people together. Cultural nationalism stress the preservations and promotions of these cultural aspects as the foundations of national identity. Now we are talking about the patriotisms and nationalisms. Patriotisms refer to love for one's country and a sense of loyalty and devotion to its welfare, often with an emphasis on civic value and democratic institutions. Nationalism is more focused on the identity of the nation itself, often prioritize the national interest over others, and sometimes fostering exclusiveness or xenophobia sentiments. Sovereignty. Nationalists typically advocate for the political independence and sovereignty of the nations. This can lead to the movements for a national liberations, such as decolonization efforts in the 20th century, where colonizations people sought to reclaim control over the land and the governance. Now, talking about the types of nationalism, that is talking about the civic nationalisms. Give nationalism, also known as liberal nationalism, is based on a shared commitments of political principles and value rather than ethnic or cultural homogeneity. It emphasizes inclusive citizenship, and that is the role of the democratic institutions in fostering a national identity. France and the United States are often cited as examples of the civic nationalisms where nations is identified by the common sets of value such as liberty, equality, and rule of law rather than ethnicity or religions. Ethnic nationalisms, that means ki ethnic nationalisms define nation based on shared ethnicity, language, or race. It emphasizes a common necessity or bloodlines and can often be extraordinary seeking to protect the purity of the nations by maintaining distinct boundary. Examples include the German nationalism during the 19th century, 20th century, where national identity was closely tied to the ethnic and racial heritage, especially under the Nazi regimes. Here I am talking about the economics nationalisms. Economic nationalism focus on the protecting and promoting a nation's economic interest. It often includes policy of protectionism such as tariff and trade barriers to defend domestic industry from the foreign components. Economic nationalism has been on the rise in recent years with movements advocating for the local productions and the restrictions on global trade is seen and the rhetoric around the America First policy in the US and uh, pre-exist in the UK. Next is that is talking about the historical developments of the nationalism, 18th and the 19th nationalism. Nationalisms as a modern political ideology emerged during the 18th century, particularly during the American revolutions and the French revolutions. In these revolutions, the concept of sovereignty shifted from the being vested in monarch to being vested in the peoples or the nations. During the 19th century, nationalism fueled independence movement across Europe and Latin America. The unifications of Italy and the Germany were direct outcomes of the nationalist movement and sought to unite fragmented suit and the principality under the common national identity. Next is that is talking about that each here colonialisms and anti-nationalisms. In the 20th century, nationalisms played a crucial role in the decolonization process as colonization peoples in the Asia, Africa, and Middle East ought to be established independent nation state. Figure like the Mahatma Gandhi in India and in the Ghana that is Mini in Bian were nationalist leaders who fought for the self-determination of their country. Nationalism in the 20th century. Nationalism played a destructive role in the early 20th century, contributing to the outbreaks of the World Wars, first as rival nationalists clash in Europe. Nationalist ideology also contributed to the rise of fascism and Nazism in the Italy and the Germany, which led to the World War II. The periodics after the wars saw the emergence of new nation states in Europe, Asia, and Africa, partially shaped by the nationalist ideology. Here I am talking about the nationalist in the 21st century, risk of populism and nationalism. In the recent years, nationalist movements have resulted particularly in the response to globalizations, immigrations, and economics inequality. Nationalist leaders and party have gained promises by the emphasizing national sovereignty, controlling borders, and protecting traditional values. Populist nationalist movement in Europe, such as exist, that is talking about in the UK and rise of the far right party in the France. Italy and Hungary advocate for a returns to the national sovereignty and the rejections of supranational organizations like the European Union. In the United States, Donald Trump's America First policy reflected a form of the nationalism that sought to prioritize Americans' interests, including their trade protectionism and immigration restrictions. Next is that is talking about here that is ethno-nationalisms and xenophobia. That means here this is ethnic nationalisms has been accompanied by the xenophobia and exclusions policy, particularly targeting immigrants of the minority seen as threats to the nation's identity. This form of nationalism has been particularly prominent in countries facing larger scale immigrations, where some people leaders exploit nationalist sentiments to advocate for their strict immigration policy or the limits the rights of the minority. Nationalism versus globalization. A significant tensions in the contemporary policy is the conflict between the nationalism and globalization. Nationalists often criticize the globalizations for underlining national sovereignty, eroding local cultures, and creating economic inequality. Global institutions like the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and International Monetary Funds are often viewed as a nationalist as infringing on the ability to a state to make decisions in their own interest. Next is that is criticisms of the nationalisms, that is exclusions and intolerance. Nationalisms can become exclusiveness, creating us as a themes mentally that foster hostility towards outsiders, minority, or those who do not conform to the national's identity. This can lead to the xenophobia, racism, and discriminations. Aggressive nationalisms, when nationalisms turn aggressive, it can result in expansionisms, militarisms, or imperialisms as seen in the Nazi regimes, its beliefs in Aryan supremacy and their justifications for conquering during the World War II. Undermining global cooperations in a interconnected world, critics argue that nationalisms can undermine global cooperations on the issue like climate change, economic inequality, or public health. Nationalist policy that prioritize the short-term national interest over the global solutions that can expectations global problems. Conclusions. Nationalism is a powerful and often controversial force in policy capable of uniforming peoples under a common identity but also dividing society or fueling conflicts. Its impact has shaped the nations both positively in terms of the self-determination and negatively in terms of the exclusions and war. In the 21st century, the challenge is how to be recognizable nationalist sentiments with the demands of a globalized world that require cooperation across borders to address shared challenges. Next is that is talking about the key tensions between the liberty and pluralism. Here I am talking about the pluralist society. Tolerating diversity is essential for maintaining peace and harmony. However, tensions arises when certain groups or individuals use their liberty to promote view or principles that contradicts or threatens the liberty of the others. John J.S. Mill's harms principles is often invoked in such cases. Mill argued that individuals should be free to act as they wish to unless their nationals harm others. The challenge is deciding that constitutions harm is a pluralistic context. For example, should a society tolerate hate speech or discriminatory practice if they claim to exercise their right to free expressions or religious liberty? Cultural and religious liberty. Cultural and religious practices can sometimes clash with the liberal values such as individuals' rights or gender equality. For examples, certain religious or traditional practice may impose restrictions on women's or minority groups within these cultures. The question arises how can a pluralistic society protect the liberty of individuals within these groups while respecting cultural autonomy? This issue is especially complicated when individuals within these uh, communities seek greater freedoms that may challenge the norms of their own cultures. Next thing that is talking about the liberalisms and pluralisms. Liberal political philosophy generally emphasizes individuals' autonomy and freedoms, but some critics argue that this can be sometimes be in the tensions with the pluralisms. Charles Taylor, as a proponent of the communitarianisms, argue that liberalism emphasizes on the individual rights and can neglect the importance of community and shared cultural identity. He suggested that cultural requirements recognitions of collective rights alongside individual ones, particularly in society where certain groups like the indigenous peoples may have distinct cultural practice that need to be protected. Extended this debate about the advocating for the groups differentiated rights to protect cultural minority in pluralistic society, arguing that a pluralist individual's approach to liberty may not suffice for the preserving the distinction of the minority cultures. Liberty versus identity politics. The rise of identity in a pluralistic society presents a challenge for a how liberty is conceptualized. Different groups, often based on race, gender, religions, or sexuality, advocates for recognitions, representations, and rights within the society. The society tensions arises when the claims of these groups are seen as limiting the liberty of others or where the rights of one group with the others. For instance, debates around the religious identity and LGBT rights illustrations can pluralisms and can lead to the conflict over those liberties should be preserved. Next is that is the talking about the theoretical approach in balancing liberty and pluralisms. It's talking about the Berlin's was a prominence of the value pluralisms is the idea that there is multiples often conflicts but equally valid value that humans beings can pursue. He believed that no single ideology or systems of value could be captures all of the complexity of human life. In his view, a pluralistic society is one where different values are required and respected, but it required constant recognitions of balance, that liberty of different individuals and groups. This, however, can lead to the tragic choices where some value had to be sacrificed to the upload others. John Rawls' theory of the justice. In his works, A Theory of Justice, John Rawls advocates for a form of the pluralisms based on the idea of public reasons. Rawls argued that in a pluralistic society, a political decisions should be based on principles that our rational citizens can endorse regardless of their personal value or beliefs. Each idea of overlapping consciousness suggested that even in the society with diverse morals or religious view, individuals can agree on a basic frameworks of a right, justice that govern society as a whole. Multiculturalisms and groups' rights. Political theorists like the uh, Bill Cummings argue that traditional liberal approach to liberty must be modified in the pluralistic society to accommodate the rights of the minority groups, and he suggested that individual liberty is sometimes insufficient to protect the identity and autonomy of cultural groups. Multiculturalism is a political philosophy advocate for a recognition of the group's rights, which might include social, legal, and protectionism, language rights, and territorial autonomy to ensure that minority cultures can survive and diverse in a pluralistic society. Deliberative democracy, here I am talking about the Jigrans Habrams. The other proponents of the deliberative democracy argue that pluralistic society should be fosters a public sphere where different groups and individuals can engage in recognizing dialogues about their conflicts, value, and interest. The idea is that through the deliberations and dialogues, a society can reach decisions that respect the liberty of all participants, which acknowledge the some kind of the pluralisms. Now we're talking about the liberty and pluralisms in practice. Freedoms of speech versus hate speech. In a pluralistic society, freedoms of speech is a fundamental liberty. However, the challenge is when a speech is used to incite violence or hated against a specific groups. Government must navigate the tensions between the allowing free expressions and protecting the vulnerable groups from the religious liberty and the secularisms. The issue of religious liberty is central to the pluralism. In secular society, the rights to practice one's religions freely must be balanced against the need for law and that apply equally to all regardless of religious beliefs. Next is that is talking about immigrations and cultural integrations. That is, here I am talking immigrations policy often highlighted the tensions between the pluralisms and liberty. One of the hands new immigrations community bring cultural diversity on the one hand, and there are concerns about how these groups will integrate into the broader social frameworks without infringing on the liberals of others abandoning their own traditions. Conclusions. The interplay between the liberty and pluralism is one of the negotiations balance and respect for diversity in pluralistic society. Protecting liberty involve not just freedoms from the interference but also ensuring that diverse way of life can coexist. The challenge lie in the finding common grounds that respect the autonomy of individuals and groups while preserving social harmony and preventing the suppressions of any particular worldview. This is called the important kind of the important lectures. Thank you. Thank you for hearing this important lecture.